When the traveler rode into town, the streets were alive with music, laughter, and lantern light. By sunrise, every soul had vanished, leaving only silence behind. The traveler arrived just after nightfall, riding through a long stretch of desert, where the wind carried nothing but dust and the distant cry of coyotes. For nearly 2 days, he had seen no towns, no wagons, not even a trail fresh enough to follow. Then suddenly, the road bent around a dry ridge, and lights appeared. A town, lanterns, glowed along the main street like a line of small stars pinned to the earth. Music spilled from a saloon, rough piano keys fighting against bursts of laughter and clinking glasses. Horses stomped lazily at the hitching posts. The smell of cooked meat drifted through the warm desert air. For a place that didn't appear on his map, it looked very much alive. The traveler slowed his horse as he entered the street, watching the people carefully. Men in dust-covered coats leaned against the saloon railing. A woman swept the wooden steps of a boarding house. 2 boys ran past him, chasing each other with sticks like toy rifles. Nobody seemed surprised to see him. In fact, no one paid him much attention at all. That alone felt strange. Frontier towns were cautious places. Strangers were usually measured, with quiet stares and hands resting near revolvers. But here, the townsfolk barely looked twice. He tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside. The place was warm and loud. Cards slapped against tables. Whiskey bottles passed from hand to hand. A piano player hammered out a tune that sounded older than the town itself. For a moment, the traveler allowed himself to relax. A hot meal, a drink, maybe a rented bed for the night. That was all he needed before continuing west. He sat at the bar, ordered whiskey, and listened, but beneath the laughter, beneath the music, something felt wrong. The townspeople spoke quietly when they thought no one was listening. Conversation stopped when certain names were mentioned, and more than once he noticed people glancing toward the dark windows, as if they were waiting for something to arrive. Still, the night passed without trouble. Eventually, the lanterns dimmed. The piano went silent, and one by one, the townsfolk disappeared into their homes. The traveler rented a small room above the saloon. Outside, the wind moved through the empty street. Inside, the town slept, or at least, it seemed to. By morning, the traveler would wake up to a town that no longer existed. The traveler woke to silence. Not the quiet kind that settles over a town before sunrise. Not the peaceful stillness of people sleeping behind closed doors. This was different. This was the kind of silence that makes a man sit upright in bed before he even understands why. He listened. No footsteps below, no clatter of dishes, no horses shifting in the street, not even the distant cough of a waking ranch hand. Just wind. The traveler stood and opened the window. Morning sunlight spilled across the street, pale and cold. The lanterns from the night before still hung above the road, gently swaying. But the street was empty, completely empty. He dressed quickly and went downstairs. The saloon door creaked open beneath his hand. Inside, the place looked exactly as it had the night before, only frozen in time. Cards still lay scattered across a table. A half-filled whiskey glass rested near the piano. Someone's hat sat abandoned on the bar. Behind the counter, a plate of eggs had gone cold. The traveler stepped outside again. Every building stood open. The barber's chair was still turned toward the mirror. The general store door swung lazily in the breeze. At the far end of the street, a wagon remained, parked beside the stable, its supplies untouched. Horses were still tied to the hitching rails, alive, waiting, but their owners were gone. The traveler walked slowly through the town, his boots crunching softly against the dust. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was as if every person in town had simply stood up and walked away at the exact same moment. Near the edge of town, he noticed something else. Footprints, hundreds of them. They all led in the same direction, away from the buildings and out toward the desert. Not scattered, not chaotic, ordered, almost like a procession. The traveler knelt down to study the tracks. Men, women, children, even the small prints of boots that belonged to boys. Every single one heading toward the same distant ridge, none returning. He followed the trail for nearly a mile before stopping. The tracks ended abruptly in hard desert stone where the wind had erased the rest. But standing there, looking back toward the town, he realized something else. The place had no name, no sign, no map marking. And the longer he stared at those empty streets in the distance, the more a memory tugged at the back of his mind. Years ago, he had heard a story. Most men dismissed it as a campfire tale told by drunks and wandering cowboys. A story about a settlement somewhere in the western desert. A town that welcomed travelers with warm food, loud music, and open doors. But every few years, without warning, the entire population would vanish overnight. No graves, no witnesses, no explanation. The traveler had laughed when he first heard the story. But now, standing alone on the edge of that silent desert town, the laughter felt like a mistake. Because the strangest part of the story was not that the town disappeared. It was that the buildings always remained waiting for the next travelers to arrive. The traveler stood at the edge of town for a long time, staring at the empty buildings as the morning sun climbed higher. Everything looked normal, too normal. Smoke should have been rising from chimneys. The general store should have opened its doors. Someone should have been sweeping the porch of the boarding house like the woman he saw the night before, but the town remained frozen in a strange stillness. Even the horses seemed uneasy. They shifted. There, Wayton snorted softly, tugging against their reins as if they sensed something their riders never would. The traveler returned to the saloon. In sight. The air felt heavier than it had the night before. Sunlight crept through the dusty windows, revealing every abandoned detail, the piano, the cards, the untouched whiskey. He moved behind the bar and looked at the ledger resting near the cash drawer. The last entry had been written just before midnight. 3 drinks, 1 meal, 1 room upstairs. His room. Nothing else had been written. Afterward, he flipped through the older pages. The entries became stranger. The further back he looked, some nights the ledger was full dozens of meals. Rooms rented, drinks poured. Other pages were completely empty, as if the town had simply stopped existing for days at a time. Then he noticed something else. Names, some, appeared again and again over different months, even years. But that couldn't be right. No frontier town stayed unchanged that long. People moved west, chased gold, joined cattle drives, died in gunfights. Towns grew and died like brush fires. Yet here, the same bartender's name appeared across entries. Nearly 5 years apart, the same piano player, the same store owner, the same sheriff. The traveler closed the book slowly, outside. The wind pushed dust through the street. That was when he heard it. A sound, faint dot, somewhere near the far end of town. He stepped out of the saloon and looked toward the church that sat near the edge of the settlement. Its tall wooden doors stood half open, creaking gently as the wind pushed them. At first he thought the sound had been the door moving, but then it came again, a low metallic clink, like a chain shifting, or something brushing against iron. The traveler's hand instinctively rested near the revolver at his hip as he walked toward the church. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the building was dim and cool. Sunlight slipped through narrow windows, painting pale stripes across the wooden floor. The pews were empty, the altar untouched, but something hung on the back wall, carved with a knife. The traveler stepped closer and read the words slowly. "If the bell rings, do not answer the door." The message looked old, years old, maybe older than the town itself. The traveler stared at it for a long moment. Then he noticed something else. The bell rope was moving, just slightly, not from the wind, from below, as if something underground had just touched it. The traveler stepped closer to the bell rope. It swayed. Again, slow, deliberate, not the restless movement of wind pushing through the church walls. Something beneath the floor had touched it. He rested his hand on the rope. It was warm. That alone was enough to send a chill through him. The traveler followed the rope down to the base of the bell tower, where it disappeared through a narrow opening in the wooden floorboards. The gap looked intentional, carefully cut so the rope could pass below. He crouched and peered into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted. Stairs, old wooden steps descending into a cellar beneath the church. The traveler drew his revolver. Each step groaned beneath his boots as he moved downward. The air grew colder with every foot he descended, carrying a damp smell that didn't belong in the dry desert at the bottom. The stairs opened into a low stone chamber. Chains hung from iron rings along the walls. Rust covered most of them, but a few looked recently disturbed. In the center of the room sat a heavy wooden table. On top of it lay a thick ledger, much older than the one in the saloon. The traveler flipped it. Open. Page after page listed names. Entire families, travelers, drifters. Each entry ended the same way. One word, taken. The dates stretched back decades. Some entries were scratched out violently, as if someone had tried to erase them. Then the traveler turned to the final page. The ink was still. Fresh, written sometime during the night. Only one name had been added. His, the 8th. Traveler slowly closed the ledger. Above him, somewhere in the empty town, a bell rang. The bell echoed through the empty church like a warning carried on iron. One slow strike, then another. The traveler froze in the cellar, staring at the fresh ink of his own name written across the ledger. For a moment he thought it had to be some kind of cruel joke, maybe a trick played by thieves or outlaws who used the abandoned town to lure travelers inside. But the silence above him felt too heavy for that. He closed the book and climbed the stairs quickly, revolver already in his hand. The bell continued to ring. Slow, patient, measured. When he stepped back into the church, the rope was moving again. Only now, it wasn't stopping. Something was pulling it, hard. The traveler rushed outside. The sound carried across the down, bouncing off the empty buildings like a signal meant to travel far beyond the streets. The horses tied along the road had begun to panic. They stomped and pulled against their reins, eyes wide, ears pinned back. Animals always knew first. The traveler grabbed the reins of his own horse and swung into the saddle. His instinct screamed at him to leave immediately, to ride until the town disappeared behind the desert horizon. But before he could turn the horse around, he saw movement. Out on the ridge. The same ridge where the footprints had led earlier that morning. Figures, Dozens of them. They appeared slowly along the horizon like dark shapes rising out of the desert heat. The traveler narrowed his eyes. Men, women, children, all walking in the same direction. Toward the town. Their steps were slow and perfectly steady, as if they had been marching for hours without stopping. The traveler felt a tightening in his chest. He recognized some of them. The bartender, the piano player, the woman from the boarding house. Even the two boys who had been chasing each other through the street the night before. Every single person from the town, all returning together. But something about them was wrong. Their clothes were covered in pale dust, as if they had walked through dry earth all night. Their heads hung low, their movements stiff and unnatural, and none of them spoke. The bell continued ringing as they entered the street. One by one, they walked past the traveler without looking at him, without even acknowledging that he existed. They returned to their buildings. The bartender stepped back behind the saloon counter. The piano player sat down at the bench. The woman resumed sweeping the porch. Within minutes, the town looked alive again, just like the night before. Only now the traveler understood something terrifying. The town had never disappeared. It had simply gone. Somewhere else, and tonight, it would happen again. The traveler did not move as the town returned to life around him. The piano began playing again inside the saloon. The same tired melody he had heard the night before. Laughter followed, low and hollow, like echoes from a place far away. The woman at the boarding house swept dust across the porch with slow, mechanical strokes. The bartender wiped the same spot on the counter again and again. Everything looked normal, but at WAS and Single. No one spoke to each other. No one looked at the traveler, and the air carried a strange weight. Like the moment before a storm breaks across the plains, the traveler slid off his horse and stepped into the saloon once more. Inside, the same men sat around the card table. The same glasses stood half full. The same hats rested on the same heads. But their faces had changed. Their eyes looked empty, not dead, but distant, like people walking through a dream they couldn't wake from. The piano player continued pressing the keys slowly, staring straight ahead. His hands moved, but his expression never shifted. The traveler approached the bar. The bartender poured whiskey into a glass without being asked, and slid it across the counter for the first time since the morning. Someone spoke. "You stayed." His voice sounded dry, like it had not been used in years. The traveler kept his hand near his revolver. "What happens here?" The bartender didn't answer right away. He simply looked toward the church at the end of the street. "When the bell rings, we go where?" The bartender's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. Below, the traveler felt the weight of the ledger in his mind. "Taken, all of you?" the traveler asked. The bartender nodded slowly. "Every soul in this town." The traveler leaned closer. "And if someone refuses?" For the first time, the bartender looked directly into his eyes. "You saw the ledger?" The traveler understood then. The cellar beneath the church was not just a record, it was a promise. Outside, the sun began sinking toward the desert horizon. Long shadows stretched across the street. The bell rope in the church window moved again. The traveler stepped outside. The townspeople had begun gathering in the street, drifting slowly toward the church like sleepwalkers, answering a silent call. Men, women, children, no, panic, no, panic, no. Resistance, just quiet obedience. The traveler knew he had one chance. He rode hard toward the church and dismounted at the door. Inside, the bell rope swung violently, pulled from somewhere beneath the floor without hesitation. He drew his knife and slashed through the rope. The bells stopped instantly. Silence crashed over the town. Outside, the townspeople froze for the first time. Confusion crossed their faces. Then the ground beneath the church trembled. A deep rumble rolled upward from the cellar below. Like something ancient had just been denied its meal. The travelers stepped back as the floorboards cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. The rumble turned into a roar rising from the darkness beneath. The town, whatever had been calling them underground, was no longer waiting patiently. The roar beneath the church shook the entire town. Floorboards split apart as something heavy slammed against the cellar doors below. The ground trembled like distant thunder rolling under the desert. Outside, the townspeople stood frozen in the street. For the first time since the traveler had arrived, they looked awake, truly awake. The bartender stumbled backward out of the saloon, staring toward the church with wide, terrified eyes. "What did you do?" he whispered. The traveler didn't answer. Another violent crash erupted beneath the church floor. Dust burst through the cracks as the cellar doors bent upward. Whatever had been down there had waited a long time, and now it was angry. "Run!" someone shouted. Panic spread through the town like wildfire. Families grabbed each other and fled toward the desert. Horses broke free from the hitching rails and bolted down the road. The traveler mounted his horse and looked back once. The church floor collapsed inward with a thunderous crack, revealing a deep black hole where the cellar had been. From that darkness came a sound no man should ever hear, something massive dragging itself upward, furious and starving. But the townspeople were already gone, riding hard into the desert, scattering across the open plains, breaking whatever. The silent chain had kept them returning night after night. The traveler didn't stay to see what emerged. He rode until the town vanished behind the hills. Days later, when he passed through another settlement, he asked if anyone had heard of a place in the desert with lanterns, a saloon, and a church with a bell. No one had. And when a map was placed in front of him, the road where the town had stood was empty, as if it had never existed at all. Some towns disappear because people leave. Others vanish because something beneath them refuses to let go. If you enjoyed this dark frontier mystery and want more untold Wild West legends, make sure to subscribe to Whispers of the West. Every story uncovers the secrets buried beneath the dust of the old frontier. And remember, some roads should never be followed after sunset.